Recording progress.
Good morning and welcome to the another session on Information System Audit Course 3.0. In today's session, I'll be taking a mock round of series of questions uh, consisting 50 questions with their explanation so that it can help you or help the applicants who are appearing for this May exam. So without wasting much of time, I'd just like to start directly with the questions, right? So moving on with the first question, if you look into it, it says in a risk-based audit planning, an IS auditor's first step is to identify, these are the options which are given to us. As I have discussed in my earlier video, the biggest problem with the ESA exam or the challenge which ESA exam poses is that the answers are these are not mutually exclusive, which means that if in a way, if you look into it, most likely you will find in most of the questions that the answers, you don't have the option of ruling out the possibilities of which are the not correct answers, right? So these are somehow very interconnected. So let's put it this way. Let's evaluate the options. The first is responsibility of the stakeholders, high risk area within the organization, cost center, and the profit center. The first question as such is taken as in a simpler way so that you get the confidence that you know the things. So it's like that. Obviously, if you look into it, the answer is the high risk areas within the organization. Because the purpose of the IS auditor is to give the assurance to the organizations and management of the organization that the information assets are being and they're being safeguarded and protected. And for that, he has the responsibility of identifying what are the key areas or the high risk areas within the organizations. So, these risk areas can be internal and external. That's very important. You should understand because I've highlighted the word with the red. These are the two words in vulnerabilities and the threats. These are very often used in the ESA examination question paper. So if you look into what vulnerabilities, these are internal. These are the internal high risk areas. Now, when I say internal high risk areas, you need to understand that the information systems are make use of both hardware and the software. Hardware are the physical devices, your computing devices, and the networking devices. Whereas the software is your, the algorithms and the program, which can be of application software or the system software. Now, together they constitute what you call it as a computing facility in which the digital assets or the information resources resides that of an organization. So when you are protecting your digital assets, you may use, firewalls, you may use, security programs, antiviruses, but still you will find that there are internal loopholes within within these protections. As a result, high risk areas, as an auditor, we have to identify what are the high risk areas within the organization which are internal to it. And the threats are external, that despite protecting from various using various protections like antivirus, firewalls, and things like that, still the systems are being prone to attack from the intruders. So that's the important area we must understand. So vulnerabilities are internal weaknesses or internal loopholes. For example, I'll put it this way to make you understand. You are moving out with your car, right? And you left by mistake one of the windows open. That means what? It is your responsibility to ensure when you get out the car that all the windows are closed. But if you leave it open, you are inviting people to enter into your car or theft to happen from that very open window. That's in vulnerability. But despite all the doors are locked, all the windows are closed, still the theft of cars have been taking place these days. That's an external threat that despite I have taken all the precautions and the measures to protect my internal high risk areas, still I am being exposed. So as an IS auditor, we have the responsibility of ensuring that whatever the risk areas are there within the organization, be it external and internal, they're well protected. Moving on to the next question, the major advantage of risk-based approach for audit planning is. Now, I always request and suggest that please read the question carefully. This will give you an idea as to what the type of question or what the question is trying to ask or what the question is trying to suggest or hint to you. And options, let's see, an audit planning can be communicated to the clients in advance. Yes. Audit activity can be completed within allotted budget. Yeah, it's also true. Use of latest technology for audit activities. Yeah. And the last is appropriate utilization of resources for the high risk areas. Now we know that there are, as we are talking about, information system audit is basically nothing more or less than that of risk management. How in organizations who are relying on the digital assets can ensure that they are protected from the external and internal threats. And that's basically you're talking about the risk management. So if you look into the options, we'll find that the identification of the high risk areas and the associated assets so that the resources can be mobilized in monitoring and safeguarding those high-risk areas and the assets. It's very clear that, when you're talking about the risk-based approach, again, risk-based approach is nothing but it's a type of information system audit. It's another name for information system audit. So when I talk about the information system audit, the purpose of it is to protect the high-risk areas and the assets. And for that, I must be very clear what type of resources these areas require. So unless and until I do that, it will be difficult. So appropriate utilization of resources for high risk area is the correct answer. Third question, the decision and action of IAS auditor is most likely to affect which of the following risk? Very important questions. Question very oftenly repeated. Now, if you look into it, most likely, as I have mentioned in my earlier video, talking about the framework of visa examination, where I have spoken about it, that means these all are the risk. These are likely, but the question is asking which is the most likely. Now let's put it this way: most likely first is inherent. Inherent means the risk which is coming, which you cannot control it because it comes the moment you talk about that you are running a business. Detection risk, control risk, and the business risk. All of them are there, but if you look at from the IAS auditor point of view, now inherent risk, no. Control risk, no. These risks are there because of the security features which you are implementing, and the business risk. So if you look into it, detection risk is the chance that an auditor will fail to find material misstatement that exists in entity's financial statement just because now again, detection is individual perception used by detecting risk by using certain tools. The most likely chances are there that an IAS auditor might commit an error or a risk related to detection risk. So please, I would appreciate if you can read all about what is inherent risk. That is a risk which is beyond your control. Detection risk, that is when an IAS auditor failed to report a material misstatement in the financials. Control risk, these are related to the information systems, right? So these are the risks which are there because we are implementing control policy measures to ensure to give the assurance to the system or that the digital assets are protected well. And the business risk is also known as, again, that's the risk which comes along because when you moment to try to take a, run a business, that's a part of that risk. In planning an audit, most critical step is the identification of, now you must be very clear about, when I'm talking about audits, we are talking about identification of high risk areas, skill set of the audit staff, test steps in the audit, and time allotted for the audit. I don't think so. Okay, this requires any explanation. You all must have guessed it right. It is identification of the high risk areas. Essentially, very critical to find the high risk areas and the assets as they reflect organizational vulnerabilities. I'm telling you categorically, indirectly and directly, their questions are framed around these two types of threats, which are internal and external. Vulnerabilities, always remember, these are internal loopholes or in the internal, deficiencies, which give an option to the extruders or intruders to have an access to your digital resources. So if these vulnerabilities are identified, so once you have identified and safeguarded, they have the highest potential in becoming the threats. Because once you realize that you have an internal weakness, if you try to cover it up, if you don't cover it up, it becomes eventually as a threat. Risk assessment process is, again, very interesting question: subjective, objective, mathematical, and statistical. Now, if you carefully understand that risk assessment is what, it's an individual perception. I've made it very clear in the question number 3. See, if you look into it, risk assessment is based on individual perceptions. Hence, it is very, very subjective. See, again, it depends on what type of information resources are being used by the organization. For example, if I'm maintaining, like say, for instance, government, foreign security data, then again, for me, that risk is very, very high because my perception of that information is very, very confidential. However, if I'm maintaining a certain office records, maybe again, the risk assessment in that case may not be that very high, as I mentioned earlier. So despite we use various tools to mitigate the risk, but the assessment, how you are going to assess the level of risk or the amount of loss which can happen because of the risk, is purely subjective. Objective means that it is universally acceptable. No, there is no principle for that universally acceptable about the risk. Risk is basically depends on the individual assessment, how I see the situation, and based on that, my perception, or based on the IS auditor's perception, the level of risk is decided, right? Obviously, mathematical and statistical, these are tools for assessing the risk. The result of risk management process is used for forecasting profit, post-implementation review, designing control, and user acceptance testing. If you look at all of the four, you will find that now, I hope with too much of explanation, which I'm giving it to you for each question, you will be able to appreciate the fact that the risk management has got something to do with the designing of controls. Because when I say that risk management, risk assessment, risk mitigation, these are all various aspects of risk management, right? So here we are talking about, okay, when an organization is trying to manage the risk, what it is trying to do, it is trying to design the control measures or the control procedures so that the level of risk can be minimized. So identification of high risk area helps in protecting them by designing and implementing necessary controls. So this is option C is the correct, which says this designing of controls. The next is IS auditor is developing a risk management program. The first activity to be performed is, now very clearly I have highlighted in the red color the what type of, when you are reading a question, where your attention should go. It says the first activity. See, the point is, at the heat of the moment when you are solving so many questions in the ESA examination, you forget to read the words framed in the questions correctly. Like say, for instance, it says the first activity. So if you look into the options, the vulnerability assessment, evaluation of control, identification of assets, and the gap analysis. So the first and the foremost task will be to identify the high risk areas. And high risk areas are, if you look into it, they are talking about the vulnerability assessment. So unless and until you have identified what are the internal weaknesses, you cannot evaluate the controls. You need to identify the assets, and eventually, based on that, you try to do the gap analysis where the loopholes exist. The benefit of developing organization policies using bottom-up approach is, now these are the designing module 3, if I'm not wrong, that is system development and designing processes related. So here you will find that when you are developing an organization policies, there are two approaches. One is the bottom-up approach, and the other is the top-down approach. Now, when I say top-down approach, it's just like drone view. You must have seen that drone view means the aerial view. You have a very holistic, quite big view, and you can from drone you can have the holistic view, but you cannot go into the details of it. But in case of bottom-up approach, when you're talking, then in that case, you will find that you have a granular view. You go into the details of it. So first, from a drone, if I wanted to zoom into a particular area, then I'm going into from top-down approach to the bottom-up approach. You must have seen Google Maps. When you look into the Google Maps, you'll find that then everything is visible to you across the country. But if you wanted to go to a state level, then to the city level, so you're going from top down to the bottom up approach. So the advantage of using bottom up approach is it covers the whole organization. Top down approach covers the whole organization, are derived as a result of risk assessment, will be in line with the overall corporate policy and ensures consistency across the organization. Let's see the answer. Top down, as I mentioned, is a larger and holistic view, and bottom up approach is modular or the piece view. So it will definitely, if you look into it, it will be in line with the corporate policy, and it will be because you are going granular way, you are going piece by piece, you're going modular wise, you will be ensuring that your organization's policies are, in line with the corporate policy. Risk can be mitigated by, now the question, please try to understand the word mitigation has got nothing to do with the elimination. The mitigation means reducing the impact. So risk can be reduced, number one, by implementing controls, by insurance, by audit and certification, and by contract and service level agreements. These are contract and service level agreements are between the third parties when we are entering into contract. So obviously, if you look into it, implementing control will prevent. It will not reduce. It will eliminate. Audit and certification, again, it will not reduce it. Neither it will affect. It can only give an assurance that the risks are there or they are not there. Contract and service level agreement, these are the agreement which has got nothing to do with the level of risk, for reducing the level of risk. So look into it, insurance. Insurance helps in reducing. So mitigating means lessening or reducing. So in the given option, insurance helps in reducing the level of risk. Most important factor while evaluating control is to ensure that the controls options. Now, please try to understand evaluating control. Now, we, as an IS auditor, when we approach any organization for the information system audit, that means that organization is all, like say, for instance, we're going for a bank audit. So we know that the banks must have implemented all the control measures to ensure that the digital assets are protected. So when I am evaluating those, then what important factor is to be considered? First, addresses the risk, do not reduce productivity, is less costly than the risk, and is automative. So when I'm evaluating the control, again, remember that I have the prime concern to ensure that the control are addressing the risk. So above all the factors are important, it is essential that the control should be able to address the risk. When you are designing controls, it is very essential that all these aspects are required, but above all, the topmost priority should be given to that the control must address the risk. The key element in risk analysis is audit planning, control, vulnerabilities, liabilities. You know the answer. Obviously, vulnerabilities I'm talking about, these are the key elements in the conduct of risk analysis. Audit planning consists of short and long-term process that aims to detect threats to the information assets. You will also find the word information assets at times being used as digital assets. Controls mitigate risk associated with the specific threats, and liabilities are part of the business and are not inherently a risk. I have tried to give explanation for all the various options, but I wanted to highlight that the internal loopholes or the internal weaknesses within the organization which are there or which exist despite all the control measures for protecting the information assets is called your vulnerabilities. Moving ahead with the next question, it says, during the review of a customer master file, an information system auditor discovered numerous customer name duplication arising from variations in customer first name. To determine the extent of duplication, the IS auditor would use. Now, these are interesting questions which examination frames it on the basis of some case study type of a thing. So it's a situation where there is a master file, you reviewing a master file, and you'll find the duplication of the data is there, names are duplicated. So the first is you will use test data to validate the data input. You will use test data to determine system sort capabilities. You will use generalized audit software to search for address field duplication. And you will use generalized audit software to search for account field duplication. Now, obviously, you will find that despite the names are replicating, it's very rare that the addresses can be duplicated. So you will find for detecting duplication, it would be better to compare common fields such as addresses, and test data detects how the data were processed. So when I'm saying test data, when we talk about the test data has got always to do with the processing of the data. But when you are talking about the generalized audit software, we are talking about the software which helps in finding it out, or which helps in comparing the fields so that I can understand where the things are missing or they are not going correct. So if I say generalized audit software to search for account field duplication, so when you are talking about the field, again, so account field in the sense that accounts will always be the same because you are having a customer master file. So all accounts will be that of a customer. But when you talk about the generalized audit software to search for address field duplication, then you will find that the addresses will definitely not be the same. So in that case, I will be able to trace it out where the problem is. The information system department of an organization wants to ensure that the computer files used in the information processing facility are adequately backed up to allow for proper recovery. This is an example of control procedure, control objective, corrective control, and the operational control. Now, you please try to understand. Information system department of an organization wants to ensure that the computer files used in the information processing facility are adequately backed up. Now, I have already mentioned that we are using hardware and software as a computing facilities for the creation and protection of the digital assets. These facilities, which in the form of hardware and software, must ensure that they have a backup facility in case if the system goes down. Backup means that in case if the main system goes down, then we must have an alternative source of the information which can be used in place of the corrupted or in case of the hacked data. So वो पूछ रहे हैं आपसे कि if you look into the options A, B, and C, when you are trying to back up, it's basically a control procedure, control objective, corrective control, or operational control. Now, backup is basically a typical operational activity which is done on a routine basis. So let's see which is the correct answer. Control objective specifies, one by one I'm explaining, objective specify a minimum set of control to ensure efficiency and effectiveness. So if you talk about the control objective, this option B, it is talking about, minimum set of controls. What are the controls required for ensuring the information systems are efficient and they are effective in fulfilling the requirements. Control procedures are developed to provide reasonable assurances that specific objective will be achieved. Corrective control aims to minimize the threat, whereas operational control addresses the day-to-day operation functions and activities. It aids in ensuring that the operations are meeting the desired business objective. So if you do not understand all the four options, you may directly jump onto the conclusion like control procedure, objective, control, and corrective control or operational control. So for that, we need to understand that taking a backup is a very, very normal operational activity. So for an operational activity to happen, take place, you will require an operational control that these systems are backed up properly. During the security audit of IET processes, an information system auditor found that there were no documented security procedures. In such a situation, the question is asked, the IS auditor should do what? First option says create the procedure document, terminate the audit, conduct compliance testing, and identify and evaluate existing practices. Now, these are all options. You will find it very, very difficult to think on those terms, what an IS auditor should do. Now, if you look into it, create the procedure document, okay, that can be done. Terminate the audit, it depends on individual person. Conduct the compliance testing and identify and evaluate existing practices. If you look into the answer is like that, hey, that IS auditor, because he is not getting any documentation for the security procedures, organization does not have any documented evidence for what are the security procedures they are going to follow for safeguarding their information assets. So in that case, the IS auditor has to identify and evaluate the existing practices so that if the practice is like that, okay, they do not want to document any security procedures, it's okay. But if it is not, then he has the responsibility of reporting it to the management. When implementing continuous monitoring system, information system auditors' first step is to identify. Now, when I'm talking about the continuous monitoring system, that means whenever the information or assets are used by the organization non-stop, so in that case, there has to be a continuous monitoring system so that at any point of time for any activity which is not defined or which is not in line with the organization objective should be reported. The first step is to identify reasonable target thresholds, high-risk area within the organization, the location and format of the output file, an application that provides the highest potential payback. Now, if you look into it, it says that if you are implementing a continuous monitoring system, what should be the objective or the first step you should be? Reasonable target threshold in the sense the peak load. What is the maximum you were expecting activity from? High risk area within the organization, the location, and so if you look into it, I think the identification of the high risk areas, by now you can understand the purpose of IS information system audit is directly related with the principles of risk management. So you start looking from this, this ISA modular course from this perspective, okay, that the risk management plays a very important role. So if you are not a very vivid reader for that reference course material, you have to develop this type of a conceptual framework in mind as to what are the things which I need to keep in mind when I'm appearing for my ISA examination. So if you look into it, reasonable target threshold, at the moment you see that high risk areas within the organization, obviously this should be the first step when you are when an IS auditor is trying to implement a continuous monitoring system. An IS audit of several critical servers, the IS auditor wants to analyze audit trails to discover potential anomalies in user or system behavior. Then in which of the following tool is most suitable for performing that task? Now, if you see audit trails, you all must be very, very familiar with, tracing the transaction from the forward and going back to the point of, from the end to the origin. That's basically type of an audit trail. So for that, you need to understand all the 4 options, because if you're not clear, you'll not be able to answer. So when I talk about the computer-aided software engineering tools, that is called as case tool, embedded data collection tool, that these are the tools which are embedded in the system itself. Heuristic scanning tools, these are the tools which are used for generating the empirical data. Trend and various detection tool. Now, these are the tools which will help in identifying or detection of an abnormal trend within the information system or the information which is available within the organization. So if you look into it, the computer-aided software engineering tool, and now here the question, if you read it carefully, it talks about discover potential anomalies. Anomaly means potential trends I'm talking about, potential variances I'm talking about in the system behavior. So if I understand again, I repeat once again, please read the question carefully. Half of the problem is solved when you read the question carefully. Do not get worried or bogged down with the fact that there are so many questions which you have to answer in such a short span of time. I would still say read the question carefully and read the words also. Like in the second line, it says, which of the following tool is most suitable? That means all of them are suitable. Out of these 4 suitable options, I need to select which is the one which is most suitable. So if you understand this, then you will find that, okay, fair enough, case tool can be used, this can be used, this can be used. But since they're talking about the potential, that is likelihood of anomalies. Anomaly means variations, that is deviations. So for that, I need to look for a trend or variance detection tool. So it clearly says that tools for anomalies in user of system behavior. Case tools are used to assist software development. Embedded data audit data collection software is used for sampling and to provide production statistics. And heuristic scanning tools are used for scanning viruses to indicate possible infected code. Right, as I mentioned to you, that these are the areas. So when you are looking into my, when you're watching this video, so besides you listen to me, please also, I would suggest you to read the explanation which I am giving so that this can help you. IS auditor should use statistical sampling and not judgment, that is non-statistical sampling when. There's the options are there. There are circumstances when you can use statistical sampling, that is, you're using statistical tool to collect the data sample. And then there's another ways that is where you are using non-statistical methods for collecting the samples. So the options are: the probability of error must be objectively quantified. The auditor wishes to avoid sampling risk. Generalized audit software is unavailable and the tolerance error rate cannot be determined. If you look into what statistical sampling is, the question talks about the 2 statistical and non-statistical. I will be discussing about both so you can get the answer. Statistical sampling is an objective method. Objective means it is a standard. Everybody can use it. Sampling which helps in determining the sample size that can quantify the probability of the error. And using statistical sampling, I can get the sample size. Now, sampling risk is the risk of a sample not being representative of the population. Now, when you think in those terms, what is a sample and what is the population? For example, if I wanted to find out total number of engineers in the city of Uttar Pradesh, then what will I do? Either I go, connect with all the engineers across UP, which is practically not possible because the population is too large. So what will I do? I will take this on the basis of a particular city. Let's say, for instance, I select 2-3 cities in like Kanpur, Lucknow, and other places, right? And from there, I'll try to draw a sample. Based on that sample, I would like to estimate the size of the population, which is across the UP. So population is bigger, sample is representation of that population. So like say, for instance, when we get the polls and the analysis, election analysis and all that, it's not possible that they're doing it, the population is too large, but they draw samples, and based on the sample, they draw the inferences about the population, right? So sampling risk is the risk of a sample. That is, when I say sample risk is high, it means that the sample is not the correct representation of the population. Statistical sampling does not require the use of generalized audit software because it itself is an objective method where the statistical tool or statistics is being used. Tolerable error rate must be predetermined for both judgment and statistical sampling. So if here you will realize, so the correct answer for this out of these options is, if you realize, it says the auditor wishes to avoid the sample risk, or the probability of error must be objectively quantified. So when I'm talking about as an IAS auditor using statistical sampling and not judgmental sampling, it should be used only when the probability of error must be objectively quantified. I wanted to quantify the probability of the error that the sample is not representative of the population. The risk that controls put in place will not prevent, correct, or detect error on a timely basis. Now, these are the types of risk we are talking about: inherent risk, control risk, detection risk, and the correction risk. We have spoken about these risks in the earlier questions. I'll repeat once again now. When I say control risk, means that the risk that misstatement could occur but may not be detected or corrected or prevented by the entity internal control mechanism. Now, control risks, inherent risk means this is beyond my control. Detection, that is where an IAS auditor fails to report about the misstatement in the financials. Correction risk is that the risk, because of the corrections are there, which not normally happens. Control risk is, that is, this risk means that the misstatement could occur, but may not be detected or prevented by the internal control mechanism. So this is a type of a controlled risk which exists. Which of the following factor IAS auditors should primarily consider when determining the acceptable level of risk? Now, when I say, again, as we have discussed earlier, the level of risk or the risk assessment is purely subjective, in the sense it depends on the individual perception of the risk. So let's see the options. The option says risk acceptance is the responsibility of senior management. All risks do not need to be eliminated for a business to be profitable. Risk must be identified and documented in order to form proper analysis on them. And line management should be involved in the risk analysis because management sees risk daily that others would not recognize. Now, it says that which are the following IAS factors IAS auditors should primarily consider when determining the acceptable level of risk. So when you are, you cannot 100% be sure that the risk is being eliminated. So, but you have to decide what is acceptable level of the risk when you are doing an audit. So for that, out of these 4 options, if you look carefully, risks have to be identified and documented in order to be proper analysis can be performed. So that's C option is correct. IAS auditor is reviewing the internal controls of an application software. As I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about the computing facilities, there are 2 types of software: application software and the system software. System softwares try to configure the computing resources in terms of hardware, whereas application software sits on the system software, and these are very specific software which perform a specific task. For example, if you talk about the application software, MS Office is an application software. Within that, there are modules of MS Word, MS Excel, and MS Office. PowerPoint. So in this case, IAS auditor is reviewing the internal control related to the application software. That means these are the software which the company has purchased for performing a specific task. The sampling method that will be most useful when testing the compliance. Now, compliance in the sense what the application software claims and what the software actually does. So as an IS auditor, you have the responsibility of checking for the compliance. Compliance in the sense, there are certain things which are mentioned by the application software that this will do this. So when you are ensuring, giving assurance to the management of the organization about the information resources, you have to do the compliance testing. So first is the attribute sampling. Options are variable sampling, discovery sampling, and stop or go sampling. Now, if you look into it, attribute sampling, attributes means the features. So when you are talking about the compliance, you are trying to match the attributes of the application software. So attribute sampling is the primary sampling method used for compliance testing. Please remember that, which means I am trying to check whether the controls are present or they are absent. Attribute sampling is used for estimating the rate of occurrence of a specific quality attribute in a population for quality assurance. Again, right from the first question I've been talking about, IS auditor has a responsibility of reporting about the quality assurance standard related to the information assets. Variables, discovery, and stop and go sampling are substantive sampling of details or quantity. Now, there are two types of testing. One is the compliance and the other is substantial. Now, when I say compliance testing, I'm testing the attributes, one which are promised and one which are working within the system when I have purchased it. If their compliance testing results are not very satisfactory, then in that case, I like to go for what you call it as substantiative or substantive sampling, which means now I would like to go in detail and find out that within an attribute, what all other things are there which are not working. Test to determine whether last 50 new user requisitions were correctly processed is an example of. Now, these are all talking about basically the type of testing and sampling. So I would suggest that please watch my video for module 2 and 3, where I have module 3 and 4, where I have talked about different types of sampling and different types of testing. Very carefully, because that's an exhaustive presentation, which will give you a clear idea. So if you talk about, now it's a direct question which says, if I wanted to test and determine whether the last 50 new user requisitions were correctly processed or not, it's an example of discovery sampling, substantive testing, compliance testing, or stop and go sampling. Now, compliance testing, see again, it checks for the presence of control. Compliance testing determines whether the controls are being applied in compliance with the policy or not. The result of compliance testing form the basis for substantive testing, as I have mentioned earlier. If compliance testing indicates a strong internal control, substantive testing may be waived off or reduced. And the development of substantive test is often dependent on the outcome of compliance testing. So here you will find that I am trying to find out if I'm saying whether the last 50 new user requisitions were correctly processed or not is an example of my compliance testing. An IS auditor is using a statistical sample to inventory the tape library. What type of a test would this be considered? Now, if you look into it, statistical sample, which I'm using it to inventory the tape library. I'm talking about the library. These are all hardware resources in which the data is stored. So which type of a test would be considered? Look into it: substantive test, compliance test, integrated test, and a continuous audit test. So using a statistical sample to inventory the tape library is an example of substantive test, because now I am talking about in detail about I'm using a statistical sample to inventory in the sense to record into the tape library, which is again, it is not the compliance. It is now gone into detail. So it will be substantial testing. Which of the following test is an IS auditor performing when a sample of program is selected to determine if the source and the object version are the same? Now, again, when you talk about these type of source code and the object code, you will find that programs, when they're written, that's the source code. That's the normal codes and algorithms. These are called source. But when they're compiled, they becomes the executable when these programs are there and they're compiled, because a normal user will not be able to understand the programming codes, be it Java, R, or anything, any language. So what happens is that the programmer normally write the program in the source code, and once the output is accepted, they try to compile the program. And when you compile it, it turns out to an object version. So if I wanted to determine whether the source and the object codes are the same, and what type of things I should do is, it says substantive test of program library controls, so compliance test for program library control, compliance test for program compiler control, and substantive test for program compiler control. I've used the word compile. So compilers are the programs that convert source code into object code. So a compliance test determines if the controls are working as designed, right? So if you're talking about the compliance test, so if the IS auditor is concerned with the program library control are working properly, the IS auditor might select a sample of a program to determine if the source and object version are the same. So if the questions clearly says that, so select sample of you're talking about, so program, your compliance, IS auditor has to go for selecting of compliance test of program library controls, because this is how things are going to be compared. And this is how he can compare the source code and the object code versions are the same. In a risk-based audit approach, an IS auditor, in addition to risk, would be influenced primarily by. Now, we're going into details of the risk management. So far, we have done 25 questions. You will find different flavors of risk management, which is being asked in a different form, like be it in terms of mitigation, be in terms of assessment, be in terms of testing, all are concerned with the management of risk. So it says that in a risk-based audit approach, which is audit, information system audit, an IS auditor, in addition to the risk management, besides risk, he would also primarily influence in the sense he would be governed by. So if you look into it, there are the options all are very new. This audit charter, management representation, organization structure, and number of outsourcing contract. Out of this, I would like to draw your attention to the document called Audit Charter. Now, Audit Charter defines the auditor's roles and responsibility, and it is in the documented form. So what an auditor can do and what is he responsible for? Primarily, Audit Charter clearly outlines that an auditor is responsible for giving assurance to the management that the information systems are properly managed and controlled. So the audit charter outlines the overall authority of the audit function as the primary action. Hence, primarily auditor's action will be influenced by the audit charter. So I would suggest from here, go to this first module of mine and listen to the video carefully and which talks about the audit charter. The result of risk management process is often used for making, number one, business strategy plans, audit charters, security policy decisions, and decision related to the outsourcing. Now, again, if you see the result of risk management process, this risk management process is normally done by the organization. So they would like to have decisions about the risk management process is about making specific security related decisions such as level of acceptable risk. Now, when I say you are talking about the acceptable risk, it has got nothing to do with the business strategy plan, security policy decisions, and decisions related to the outsourcing. So you will find the option C is correct, because here you are talking about the security policy decisions, because based on the level of risk you have already found or you have assessed, you would like to define the security policy. So option C is correct. Audit charter should include, number one, yearly audit resource planning, audit functions, reporting structure, audit report drafting guidelines, and yearly audit calendar. So look into the answer. The audit charter outlines the overall authority, scope, and responsibility of the audit function. So if you look into the option B, it says clearly audit function reporting structure, right? So audit charter should include audit function reporting structure. Ideally, head of the audit function reports to the audit committee. So if you realize the audit charter itself is basically a document. You must have seen Ghoshna Patra when the political parties are talking about it, something like that. You're talking about when you talk about the audit charter, you are trying to declare or you like to outline the overall authority, scope, and responsibility of the information system audit. Next is senior management has requested that an IS auditor assess the departmental management in implementation of necessary control. Then in that case, what should IS auditor do? Now, the first option says refuse the assignment since it is not the role of information system auditor. Inform management his or her inability to conduct the future audits. Perform the assignment and future audits with due professional care. and obtain approval of user management to perform implementation and follow up. Now, if you look into it, IS auditor is not directly supposed to be involved in the implementation of necessary control. So he has to inform management about his inability to conduct the future audit. In this situation, auditor should inform management of the implementation of independence in conducting further audits in the audit area, which clearly means that if you are trying to insist me on helping in implementation of a control, so since I will be the one as an auditor implementing, so then my assurance will be compromised, which I'll be giving it to you based on what I have been checking, because now I am implementing, so there is no question of checking. Which of the following is most likely reason as to why email systems have become a useful source of evidence for litigation? Now, this is again an important question because it says, what are the ईमेल सिस्टम का ऐसा कौन से फीचर है जिसकी वजह से वो आज की डेट पर एक एविडेंस के तौर पर यूज करी जा सकती है? First is multiple cycle of backup files remains available. Access control establishes accountability for email activity. Data classification regulates what information should be communicated by email, and within the enterprise, a clear policy for using email ensures that the evidence is available. Now, all these options, unless and until you have worked in this in an information system environment, you will find it difficult to comprehend. So let me give you an answer for this. That backup file contain a document that have been deleted, which can easily be recovered from these files. So we all know that the backups are there, as I have discussed earlier. So even if you delete it, you can recover those backup files. So access control may help establish accountability for issuance of a particular document, but this does not provide any evidence of the email. So the answer over here is access control establishes accountability for the email activity. That activity has been done. Accountability means that you are responsible. You cannot deny that you haven't done this, right? An IS auditor is evaluating control self-assessment program of an organization. So what is the main objective for implementing control self-assessment CSA program? Now, control self-assessment, these are the programs implemented by the organization itself for assessing the for getting the internal assurances about the systems, about the control behavior of the system which they have already implemented. So when you are talking about the main objective of of any organization who is trying to implement control self-assessment program, then what it is? The first is to replace audit responsibilities. I don't think so. To enhance employees' capabilities, yes, to a certain extent. To comply with the regulatory requirements and to concentrate on high-risk area. The objective of self-assessment, control self-assessment is to concentrate on high-risk areas. That's the only purpose. It has never been the concept of based on the fact that it should replace the audit responsibilities. Rather, it has the purpose of enhancing the audit responsibilities, right? Let's move on quickly to the question number 3. We have 20 more questions to complete before we end this mock session. An IS auditor has been asked by the management to support its control self-assessment program, and the role of information system auditor is to auditor in a control self-assessment program should be that of number 1, program in charge, program manager, program partner, and program facilitator. Now, you clearly in the earlier question we have spoken that the purpose of having control self-assessment program is not to reduce or replicate or not to do away with the audit responsibilities. So the program in charge, an auditor cannot be the program manager, they cannot be the program partner. However, an IS auditor can be the program facilitator. So his role is to facilitate the control self-assessment program. Now, control self-assessment program, once again, I repeat it, CSA bolte hain isko. These are the programs which are implemented by the organization internally to get the internal assurance from the organization, people working in the organization itself, that the information systems are working properly. An organization, it's like an internal audit department, that you have an internal audit department and the external auditor. Internal auditor job is to ensure that things are working properly, but that does not overrule the fact that if you have an internal audit department, you will not go for external audit. An organization has outsourced designing of IT security policy. Which of the following function cannot be outsourced? Very important and very relevant questions and quite oftenly asked. माने हम अपनी IT सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी को आउटसोर्स कर देते हैं to some experienced organization to design it. So in that case, despite we have outsourced our IT security policy, which other things cannot be outsourced? First is accountability for the IT security policy, benchmarking security policies with the other organization industry, implementing this policy, and user awareness of the policy. Now, the first is that no matter whatever you are doing outsourcing, whatever things you get outsourced from the third party or any other person, you cannot do away with your accountability and responsibility. Here you will find that in no circumstances the accountability of the organization maintaining the digital assets or the information assets can be transferred to the external policy parties, despite the fact that they have already outsourced designing of the IT security policies. So let's be very clear. An organization is outsource IT support service to a provider in another country. Read the word carefully, in another country. Which of the following conclusions should be the main concern for the information system auditor? Now, you will find that the IT support services are being outsourced to a different country. And like, for example, there are companies in India, those who have outsourced their IT support services to, let's say, for instance, Singapore. And if you as an IS auditor doing the audit for this Indian company, what will be your main, which are the following conclusions or what are your main concerns? Number one, legal jurisdiction can be cancelled, can be questions, increase in overall cost, delay in providing services due to time differences, and difficulty to monitor performance of outsourced vendor due to geographical distance. Most clearly, if you look into it, all four looks like to be almost correct. So again, you will find that in absence of proper clarification, there can be compliance as well as legal issues, because once you are talking about another country, the IT rules and regulations of a country might differ. So in that case, when you are talking about outsourced IT support services as an IS auditor, you'll be concerned about legal jurisdictions, which can be questions, right? The initial step of establishing an information security program is, now when I'm talking about the information security program, is I'm establishing a program for protecting the digital assets. First is development and implementation of information security standard manual, performance of a comprehensive security control review by the IS auditor, adoption of a corporate information security policy statement, and purchase of security access control software. All the answers are quite confusing. So, however, if you look into this, you are talking about adoption of a corporate information policy statement. Now, when you talk about the information system program, security program, it is the management who is responsible for, defining the security policy statement, which becomes an evidence in establishing what type of security programs an organization would like to have. So a policy statement reflects the intent. It talks about the intent and support provided by the executive management for proper security and establishes a starting point for developing the security programs. Like, for example, if I'm talking about in a banks, so the banks has the responsibility that in consultation or in collaboration with the central government, a central bank, they have to decide that what type of information security policy statement, which clearly tells about the intent of the particular private bank, as far as their management intentions are concerned. Which of the following would an IS auditor consider the most relevant to short-term planning for IS department? Which of the following would IS auditor consider the most important and relevant when it is planning for short-term for the IS department, that is information system department? First is allocating resources. Second, keeping current with the technological advances, conducting controlled self-assessment, and evaluating the hardware needs. Very clearly, if you read these options, you will find that they are slightly, in a way, give an impression that all of them are correct. So, but again, the word is used here, most. So that means all of them are correct, but which is the most likely that is concerned as far as short-term planning for IS department is concerned? So in which the resources are allocated, because when you are talking about the short term, you are talking about, how the resources will be allocated for the IS information system department for a shorter period of time. That's the most important concern, because always resources are constrained. And it is the resource management, if you look into it, these are the resources which require to be planned, budgeted, and controlled. Effective IT governance requires organization structure and process to ensure that. Now, when I'm talking about the governance, I'm talking about the accountability, IT accountability, and I'm talking about the IT responsiveness, and I'm talking about the IT governance. Governance in a way is also synonymous with the word called transparency. So the options are the organization strategy and objectives extend the IT strategy. The business strategy is derived from IT strategy. IT governance is a separate and distinct from overall governance, and the IT strategy extends the organization strategies and objective. Now, when I say that effective IT governance, now when I'm talking about the maintenance of information system, how an organization effectively wants that its information systems should be governed, it requires organization structure and processes for ensuring. So these are the four options. So effective IT governance required board and executive management extend governance to IT and provide leadership, organizational structure, and processes that ensure the organization's IT sustain and extend the organizational strategies and objectives, and that is aligned with the business strategy. So if you look into it, you will find that the IT strategy extends the organizational strategies and the objective. So from this perspective, if you look into it, so IT governance के लिए that my information systems की जो governance की जो strategy होगी, it should extend organization strategies and objectives. It should not contradict. It should go in hand with the organization strategies and objectives. Which of the following should be included in the organization information system security policy? Now, you need to understand when I'm talking about the three things. If you look into the hierarchy of vision, mission, you'll find that principle, policies, and procedures. So principles are the values, principles, policies, these are the way you're going to get the things done. So which I'm talking about here is, say, information security policy. That is, as a matter of fact, these are the statements by which we will be adhering to the compliance. So it should have been, what are the things which should be included in the IS security? Number one is list of key IT resources to be secured, basis of access authorization, identity of sensitive security features, and relevant software security features. Now, the most important if you look into it, organization IS security policy, the basis for should be the who's going to be authorized, who has been given the access to authorize. So the security policy, basically, when we are creating for an organization, it provides a framework for the security as laid down and approved by the senior management. It includes definition of those authorized to grant access and the basis for granting the access. Now, for example, we all know that you might have seen in working environment that when you get an Excel sheet, and if you wanted to make, for example, 7 people are working on an Excel data, right? So I want my team member number 1 and 2 to work on column 3 and 4. But they should not touch 5, 6, and 7. So what will I do is I will lock the column 5, 6, and 7 and only give them the permission to edit permission to column number 1 and 2. That's what it is talking about. That is access authorization. To what extent and how I'm going to do that. So that should be the part of information security policy. And IS auditor is reviewing request for proposal, RPF बोलते हैं इसको, floated by the IT department to provide services from independent service provider. Inclusion of which of the below clause is most important while floating such RPF? Now, again, you will find, so far we have done 38 questions. Out of 38, I believe 15 questions must have got this word most. So it's saying that if I am request for a proposal, in the sense, if I'm getting proposal from the third party, what clause I should look forward for? References from other customers, service level agreement template, as I mentioned earlier, details about the maintenance plans, and the details about the business continuity plan. Out of these 4, as an IS auditor, how do I get about the effective deliveries or the deliverables is by the references from the customers. So if I get the references from other customers who have been using this services of the independent service provider, that give me the assurance as an IS auditor about the services which I am trying to look into the request for proposal. 39, an organization has outsourced IT support service to an independent service provider. Which of the following clause would be the best to define the service level agreement to control performance of the service provider? Now, again, as I have spoken, outsourcing means the things which I am not very capable of doing, or which are expensive for me to complete or to perform effectively, I normally give it to the third party. So when I'm giving it to the third party, so I need to enter into an agreement that is called a service level agreement. When I'm entering into a service level agreement, then I have to also ensure that the performance of the party providing that service is up to my level of standard. Like Amazon. Amazon is not into logistics, right? So there the delivery partners are there. But when Amazon enters into a service level agreement with the delivery partners, they ensure that they are delivering it as per their standards in the benchmark. So in that case, which clause you're going to look for? Total number of users to be supported, minimum percentage of incidents solved in the first call, minimum percentage of incidents reported to the help desk, and minimum percentage of agents answering the phone. Out of these, again, you will find that if, to a certain extent, all of them are correct. But if you look closely, you will find minimum percent of incidents solved in the first call. In the first call, how many things things have been sorted out, that gives a clear-cut idea about the service level agreement. I'll be finishing it and stopping it at this question number 40, because the video becomes too long to get uploaded on the YouTube. Maybe in a couple of days, I'll be uploading for another mock session. The problem with me, I might have gone over-explaining the concepts to you, but to get into the gist of it, you listen to what I'm trying to explain it to you from with the help of these questions, and then you refer to my modular videos. You will be able to do wonderful. 40, and the last question. In case of purchase of a proprietary application software, most important consideration would be, now, proprietary application software in the sense, like, say, for instance, if I get a proprietary software, I have developed it and I have patented it, and I am the one who's going to, sell that software to different. You will find many private vendors are there who are, selling of proprietary application softwares. So what should be the most important consideration I should have? Number one, a backup server is available. Whomsoever I am buying, I must ensure that that particular person is having a support system in place. A backup server will be loaded with all the relevant software and data, training to the staff, and the source code of the application we place with the escrow. Now, what I'm trying, of these 4 options, if you look into it, these are all, first 3 are internal. But when I'm buying a proprietary application software from somebody else, I need to get assurance that that person will keep continuing to provide that particular software for a longer period of time. For example, I have developed a software and I have sold it to few companies, right? And let's say, for instance, down the lane, 10 years from now, I have stopped that company, and my company, I have sold that company, and that the new company is not interested in continuing with the product which I have initially developed and sold. So in that case, those people who are using my proprietary application software will suffer a lot. So when you are purchasing a proprietary application software, what you should do, you should ask for that particular proprietary applications software vendor that how his source code of the program is being kept in the safe custody of the third person. That's basically, you call it as escrow. That means the person who has developed the application software has for protecting my interest as a user, has kept that particular source code of the proprietary application software with the third party in the safe custody. So in that case, if my company goes off, or if I'm not continuing with that, these people, those who are using my proprietary application software, can approach with the escrow vendor and get the software updates. So I think we am left with 10 more questions, but I would like to stop here because the video becomes very long and it becomes difficult to upload it on the YouTube. So thank you, and I think this should be of some help to you. And I'm very confident that as I'm trying really hard to get that book published. But in case if you find any good publisher who can be willing to publish my 6 modules, I'll be looking forward, because most of you are asking for my handouts, my notes, and my presentation. I wanted to complete this in the form of a book, where I have collected almost 500 questions with such type of explanatory answers, they can only come in the form of a video, and I'm also planning to have my website. But till the things are done, I keep watching my video, and it is free. So you can tell other people to subscribe my channel. And I'm looking forward that normally people think that, please share the notes, please share the presentation. So as of now, I can only say that you can please continue to watch my videos and help me in increasing my numbers of subscribers. So that's the only thing I can request. So with this, I wish you all the very best for your examination, and I hope this video, which is uploaded very shortly, of some use to you. Thank you very much for your time and attention.